Hi, welcome back. This is Subathra Mylsamy, partner at AK Mylsamy and Associates. So today's topic is going to be a discussion about the Copyrights Act and the recent judgment ruled by the Supreme Court, where they declared that the crime of a copyright infringement under Section 63 of the Copyright Act is cognizable and it is a non-bailable offence. I must say this is a huge step and a huge judgment in the Copyright Act as such. So before we get down into the nitty-gritty of the judgment and discussion about it, let us first try to understand what a copyright infringement is. So what is a copyright infringement? I'm sure many of you know what it is, but I would like to just explain to you the basics. Now, any use of a copyrighted work without the consent of the owner, it's constituted as a violation of the copyright. So when someone purposefully or tries to imitate or duplicates your work and they use your work for their own purpose, it is called as infringement and copyright infringement. Now the infringement as such is divided into two categories, which is a primary infringement and a secondary infringement. So under the primary infringement, it is actually the behavior or act of verbatimly copying or doing things of the original owner. And here the moral rights of the owner as such gets affected. But under the secondary infringement, here it is more of transactional based, where the work is being passed off and it is being sold on commercial purposes, where the original owner is not even aware of it. So it is more of affecting the economic rights of the owner. Another aspect which you need to note here under infringement is, while there will be awareness of the violation, it may or may not be present in the instance of a primary infringement. It is always there in the case of a secondary infringement. Next, let us see when does a copyright violation happen. The first thing is the basic thing, which is without the authorization or consent of the owner who owns the copyright, and when it is made at the time for any kind of any sale, or if you're going to hire something. For example, as in the case of this cyber piracies which happen. Very notable and common example I must say is when people actually go to the photoshopping shops and start to take xeroxes of their books, and the shops themselves start to sell copies of the books. Another important thing is when there is a public performance of a work and it is being protected by copyright as such. For example, say if there is a super hit movie, like for example Bahubali is being made as a movie, and that script then is being taken and copied and it's been enacted as a play, then it's an infringement. So the copies that violate the law are circulated for any kind of commercial and personal advantage. For example, banned books. The next one is any kind of trade related public display of counterfeit copies that harm the owner as such. For example, we have seen in open markets where they try to sell the counterfeit products, for example, like any branded products like from Gucci to Prada or Louis Vuitton. Even in the clothing lines, we see that a lot of counterfeit products which are being sold in the market. Another important thing if we have to notice is India also to a large extent starts to import a lot of counterfeit copies from other nations. For example, is the Chinese products, the counterfeit products from China which has been imported into our country for sale. That's another big infringement. Now let's see, why do we have to classify copyright infringement offences as cognizable or non-cognizable offences? See, this is an entire process of law, and in determining the process whether to arrest or in case of a bail or trial, it is important to classify the offences under a legislation. It can be as cognizable as well as non-cognizable offences, which can also be bailable and non-bailable in accordance with the Code of the Criminal Procedure. So bail can be requested as a matter of right for the offences that are bailable, but the decision to issue the bail for offences that are not bailable, which are more of the severe kind of offences, the decision remains with the courts. An accused person may be taken into a custody without a warrant in circumstances of cognizable offences. So the offences under the Copyright Act as such fall under the CRPC under two divisions of cognizable and non-cognizable. So when there are offences which are punishable with an imprisonment of say for 3 years or more, but lesser than 7 years, they fall under the non-bailable and cognizable category under Part 2 of Schedule 1 of the CRPC. However, if you look into, the bail is available and for the non-cognizable offences which merely carry a fine or a sentence of less than 3 years in jail. So according to the section 63 of the Copyright Act, some violations are punishable by imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 6 months but which may extend to 3 years. So whether the phrase may extend to 3 years as used in the Copyright Act, will it have the same impact as the 3 years and upwards as used in the CRPC? So this was a question for debate before the Supreme Court. So in this recent case of NIT Pro International versus the state of NCAT of Delhi, the Supreme Court ruled that copyright infringement is a punishable offence under section 63 of the Copyright Act, and it is also non-bailable. The bench also noted that this offence under section 63 of the Copyright Act is punishable with an imprisonment for a term which is not less than 6 months but more than 3 years as well, and a fine was also imposed, which was also referred to Part 2 and of the first schedule of the Criminal Procedure Code, titled as Classifications of Offences Against Other Laws. We saw what is all comes into the category of infringement under copyright. Now let us see what does not constitute infringement in copyright. Certain activities do not constitute as copyright infringement. For example, the use of copyrighted work for any kind of research purposes, for a study, for any kind of criticism which is being given, any kind of reviews, news reporting, usage in libraries, for schools and legislations. In the mentioned circumstances, we don't require the consent of the owner as such, so it will not fall into the category of infringement. Now, in India, there are certain following actions which do not constitute as copyright infringement. One is in accordance with section 53 of the Copyright Act, when there is a fair use and it is like a crucial defense against any kind of copyright infringement, then the owner has the burden of proving that it is a copyright violation. For example, taking photocopies for say for the purposes of studying for the examinations. Second thing is if there is any kind of associated judicial action. For example, photocopies of documents are being submitted to the courts of law. That cannot be considered as infringement. Then any kind of performance by an amateur group or society, provided that the audience is not being paid for, like probably skits or college dramas which people put out, students put out, that is not an infringement. Any kind of makings with specific restrictions of sound recordings of any kind of literary or theatrical or musical works. For example, remixing of songs with prior permissions. So I would like to conclude by saying that we need to be extremely careful and diligent about using any kind of copyrighted work, and we also have to be very sure if the work is being protected under the defenses of the copyright infringement laws. And it is extremely important for us to also come out in the open to defend ourselves, especially the owners and the authors of copyrighted work. if you're aware of your work is being infringed, it is very, very important that you come out in the open and you fight for your own rights, and please do not sit quiet about it. It is your work and you need to be recognized for it, and you need to have both your moral rights and the economic rights have to be protected for you. I request also people who are using other people's work, please obtain their consent before you put out maybe even as simple as a photograph or a music or even couple of lines from a book. Please do give due credit to the author and the source. It is extremely important that we protect these intellectual work to a large extent, and the ownership of the person has to be given due credit as well. I hope this video was useful to you all. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.